Welcome to Wisdom of the Prophets. Join us on an inspiring journey through the life of the Prophet. Peace and blessings be upon him. Through Islamic Lectures, we explore his noble lineage, early struggles, divine revelations, and the challenges that shaped his mission. How did an orphan rise to become the most influential leader in history? What lessons can we learn from his patience, wisdom, and unwavering faith? Stay with us as we uncover the profound events and timeless teachings that continue to guide millions around the world. Genealogy and Birth. The Messenger of Allah, peace and blessings be upon him, was the noblest in lineage and the highest in status and virtue. He was Muhammad ibn Abdullah, ibn Abd al-Muttalib, ibn Hashim, ibn Abd Manaf, ibn Qusay, ibn Qilab, ibn Murrah, ibn Ka'b, ibn Lu'ay, ibn Ghalib, ibn Fihr, ibn Malik, ibn al-Nadr, ibn Kinana, ibn Khuzaymah, ibn Mudaraka, ibn Ilyas, ibn Mudar, ibn Nizar, ibn Ma'ad, ibn Adnan. His father, Abdullah, married Amina bint Wahab. The Prophet was born on Monday, the 12th day of Rabi al-Awwal, in the year of the elephant. That was the year when Abrahah set out to demolish the Kaaba. The Arabs opposed him. Abd al-Muttalib informed them that the house had a lord who protected it. Abrahah came with his elephants. Then Allah sent birds carrying stones of fire that destroyed them. In this way, Allah protected the house, childhood, and upbringing. His father died while his mother was pregnant. The Prophet was born an orphan. Allah says, "Did he not find you an orphan, so he gave you shelter?" In the 40 years before prophethood, his life was marked by early experiences. Muhammad was nursed by Halima al-Sa'diyah after she came to Quraysh seeking a nursing mother. She had an infant of her own and could not satisfy his hunger. Women of Banu Sa'd refused to nurse him, fearing that his loss of his father would not bring them future benefits. Halima received a blessing and goodness in her life. Muhammad grew up different from other youths in strength, loss, and guardianship. His mother, Amina bint Wahab, died when he was 6 years old while returning from the region of Al-Abwa between Mecca and Medina. He then went to live under the care of his grandfather, Abd al-Muttalib, who cared for him with great devotion. Later, his grandfather died when he was 8. He then went to live under the care of his uncle, Abu Talib, who took him on trading journeys. During one journey, a monk told him that Muhammad would be a man of great importance. The incident of the splitting of the chest. One day in childhood, Jibril came to him. He split his chest, extracted his heart, and removed a clot, saying it was the portion of Satan. He washed the heart with Zamzam water in a basin of gold and returned it to its place. This event marked his return to his mother. Imam Muslim narrated from Anas ibn Malik that the Prophet was playing with children when Jibril seized him, split his chest, and removed a clot. He then washed it in a basin of gold with Zamzam water, returned it to his mother, and restored it. Early work and marriage. The Prophet tended the sheep of the people of Mecca. He said, "No prophet has been sent by Allah except that he tended sheep." His companions asked, "And you?" He replied, "Yes, I tended them for a part of a dinar and dirham." Khadija bint Khuwailid, a wealthy woman engaged in trade, heard of his honesty and trustworthiness. She entrusted him with her funds for a trading journey to Balad al-Sham with her servant Maysara. A monk near a tree told Maysara that whoever rested there was a prophet. Maysara relayed the words to Khadija. This led her to seek his hand in marriage. His proposal came through his uncle Hamza, and they married. Rebuilding the Kaaba. Quraysh resolved to rebuild the Kaaba to protect it from floods. They stipulated that the funds must be pure. Al-Walid ibn al-Mughira began dismantling it. They rebuilt it gradually until they reached the place of the black stone. A dispute arose over who would set it in its proper place. They agreed to accept the judgment of the first person among them. The Prophet advised them to place the black stone on a cloth carried by each tribe so that it could be set in place. They accepted his ruling without disagreement. The beginning of revelation. The Prophet used to seclude himself in the cave of Hira in Ramadan. He left everyone behind, distancing himself from falsehood and striving for truth. He pondered the creation of Allah and the universe. His visions were clear. While in the cave, an angel came and said, "Read." The Prophet replied, "I am not one who reads." The command was repeated 3 times. On the 3rd time, the angel said, "Read in the name of your Lord, who created." He returned to Khadijah in great fear, and she reassured him. Khadijah then took him to her cousin, Waraka ibn Nawfal, an elderly man who wrote the Gospel in Hebrew. The Prophet told him what had happened. Waraka said, "This is the law revealed to Moses. I wish I were among his people, so that I could be alive when your people are brought forth." The Prophet said, "Will you send forth my people?" Waraka replied, "Yes. No man has come with what you have brought except my own." He added that if the day came, support would be given with a decisive victory. Waraka later died, and the revelation ceased for a few days before resuming. Then the Prophet heard a voice from the sky. It was Jibril, who descended with the words of Allah. "O you who covers yourself, arise and warn, and your Lord exalt, and purify your garments, and avoid the unclean." Allah commanded his Prophet to call people to his oneness and to worship him alone. The Meccan Period. Secret invitation. The early call in Mecca was secret due to the widespread worship of idols and associating partners with Allah. The Prophet invited his household and those who recognized his sincerity. His wife Khadijah, his freedman Zayd ibn Haritha, Ali ibn Abi Talib, and Abu Bakr were the first to believe. Later, Abu Bakr supported him, and on his hands embraced Uthman ibn Affan, Al-Zubayr ibn al-Awwam, Abd al-Rahman ibn Auf, Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas, and Talha ibn Ubaydullah. Islam spread gradually until the call became public 3 years after it began secretly. Public invitation. The Prophet then publicly invited his own clan. He climbed Mount Safa and called on the tribes of Quraysh to worship Allah alone. They mocked him, but he continued his call. Abu Talib assumed protection of him and did not heed the objections of Quraysh. The boycott. The tribes of Quraysh imposed a boycott on the Prophet and his followers. They isolated them in the Shab of Banu Hashim by avoiding trade and marriage with them. The terms were inscribed on a board and hung on the wall of the Kaaba. The boycott lasted 3 years. It ended when leaders of Quraysh, upon revising the document, found that only the words, "In your name, O Allah," remained. The year of sorrow. Khadijah, who had been a support for the Prophet, passed away. In the same year, his uncle Abu Talib fell gravely ill. Quraysh exploited his illness and inflicted harm on the Prophet. A group of Quraysh chiefs visited Abu Talib and asked him to restrain the Prophet. Abu Talib conveyed their words. Before his death, the Prophet tried to pronounce the Shahada with him, but he did not respond. The loss of Abu Talib and Khadijah brought deep grief. This year was called the Year of Sorrow. The call beyond Mecca. The Prophet directed his call to Ta'if. He invited the tribe of Thaqif to worship Allah alone after the loss of his uncle and wife. He sought their support and acceptance of the truth. They met him with mockery and derision. The migration to Abyssinia. The Prophet urged his companions to migrate to Abyssinia due to the torture and harm they faced. He informed them that there they would find a king who did not oppress anyone. They migrated. This was the first migration in Islam. Their number reached 83 men. When Quraysh learned of the migration, they sent envoys with gifts to the Negus, the king of Abyssinia, asking him to return the migrating Muslims. The Negus did not comply. Delegation to the Negus. The Negus asked for an explanation of the Muslims' stance. Ja'far ibn Abi Talib spoke for them and explained that the Prophet had guided them to the path of truth, away from immorality. He recited the beginning of Surah Maryam, which moved the Negus to tears. The Negus then informed Quraysh that he would not surrender any of them. He returned the gifts, though envoys later clarified that the Muslims honored Isa as Allah's servant and messenger. The Negus accepted the Muslims and returned the envoys. The Isra and Mi'raj reports differ on the date of the Isra and Mi'raj. Some say it occurred on the 27th night of Rajab in the 10th year of prophethood, while others say it was 5 years after the call began. In this journey, the Prophet was taken from the sacred house in Mecca to the house of Jerusalem on a steed called Burak in the company of Jibril. He then ascended to the lowest heaven, where he met Adam. He continued to the second heaven and met Yahya ibn Zakaria and Isa ibn Maryam. He reached the third heaven and saw Yusuf. In the fourth, he met Idris. In the fifth, Harun ibn Imran. In the sixth, Musa ibn Imran. And in the seventh, Ibrahim. They exchanged greetings and acknowledged his prophethood. He was raised to the Lote tree of the uttermost boundary. Allah ordained 50 prayers for him, later reduced to 5. The Pledges of Aqaba. A delegation from the Ansar, numbering 12 men, came to pledge allegiance on the conditions of worshiping Allah and avoiding theft, fornication, sins, and false testimony. This occurred at a place called Aqaba and is known as the first pledge of Aqaba. The Prophet sent Musab ibn Umayr with them to teach them the Quran. The following year, during the Hajj season, 73 men and 2 women came to pledge allegiance. This is known as the second pledge of Aqaba, the migration to Medina. Muslims migrated to Medina to safeguard their religion and lives and to establish a secure homeland governed by Islamic principles. Abu Salama and his family were the first to migrate. Suhaib followed after relinquishing all his wealth to Quraysh. Muslims then migrated one after another until Mecca was nearly empty of Muslims. This caused Quraysh to fear the consequences. A group of Quraysh gathered in Dar al-Nadwa to find a way to rid themselves of the Prophet. They selected a young man from each tribe and struck him with one blow so that his blood would be shared among the tribes, preventing Banu Hashim from exacting revenge. That night, Allah permitted his messenger to migrate. He chose Abu Bakr as his companion, placed Ali in his bed, and entrusted him with returning trusts to their owners. The Prophet hired Abdullah ibn Ariq to guide him to Medina. The Prophet and Abu Bakr left for Jabal Thawr. When Quraysh learned of the migration, they searched for him. One of them reached the cave, and Abu Bakr grew fearful for the Prophet. The Prophet reassured him. They remained in the cave for 3 days until the search ceased. They then resumed their journey and arrived in Medina in the 13th year of the mission on the 12th day of Rabi al-Awwal. They stayed with Bani Amr ibn Auf for 14 nights. During that time, the first mosque of Islam, Masjid Quba was established, and the foundations of the Islamic State were laid. The Medinan Period, building the mosque. The Prophet ordered the construction of a mosque on land purchased from 2 orphans. He and his companions built the mosque. The Qibla was set toward the house of Jerusalem. The mosque became the meeting place for prayer, learning religious sciences, and strengthening bonds among Muslims. Establishing brotherhood. The Prophet established brotherhood between the immigrants and the helpers. This relationship was based on justice, equality, and mutual responsibility. The call to unite in faith and support one another was central to the emerging community. The Constitution of Medina needed an order to organize its people and protect their rights. The Prophet drafted a document that served as a constitution for the immigrants, the helpers, and the Jews. This document organized internal and external affairs according to Islamic law. It provided clear guidelines on unity, solidarity, justice, and submission to the governance of Allah as set forth in his Sharia. Expeditions and battles. The Prophet participated in several expeditions and battles to establish the truth and call people to the oneness of Allah by removing obstacles to the spread of the call. The battles demonstrated the conduct of a warrior who respected human life. The Battle of Badr occurred in the 2nd year after migration on the 17th of Ramadan. The Muslims intercepted a Quraysh caravan led by Abu Sufyan. Quraysh set out to protect their caravan. The battle ended with the Muslims victorious, with many captives and freed individuals. The Battle of Uhud took place in the 3rd year after migration on the 15th of Shawwal. Quraysh sought revenge for Badr. The Muslims numbered around 700, while the idolaters numbered around 3,000. When the Muslims began collecting spoils, Khalid ibn al-Walid attacked from behind, leading to the victory of Quraysh. The Battle of Banu Nadir involved a Jewish tribe that broke their pact with the Prophet. The Prophet ordered their expulsion from Medina. Their leader advised them to remain in exchange for support from fighters. The battle ended with the expulsion of the tribe. The Battle of the Trench occurred in the 5th year after migration. Leaders of Banu Nadir approached Quraysh to incite them against the Prophet. Salman al-Farsi advised digging a trench. The battle ended with a victory for the Muslims. The Battle of Banu Qurayza followed in the same year when the Jews of Banu Qurayza broke their pact and allied with Quraysh. The Prophet led 3,000 Muslim fighters and besieged them for 25 nights until they submitted. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah took place in the 6th year after migration during Dhu al-Qidah. After a dream of approaching the sacred house safely, the Prophet ordered preparations for Umrah. The Muslims entered the state of Ihram. They carried only the traveler's salutation. Quraysh prevented their entry, and rumors of conflict arose. The Prophet prepared for battle until Suhail ibn Amr negotiated a truce. The treaty established a 10-year peace and rules on returning individuals between the two groups. The Battle of Khaybar occurred in the 7th year after migration at the end of Muharram. The battle was launched to eliminate Jewish strongholds that threatened the Muslims. It ended in favor of the Muslims. The Battle of Mu'tah took place in the 8th year after migration in Jumada al-Awwal. It was triggered by the killing of Al-Harith ibn Amir al-Azdi. The Prophet appointed Zayd ibn Haritha, then Ja'far, and then Abdullah ibn Rawaha to command. The battle ended with a victory for the Muslims. The conquest of Mecca occurred in the 8th year after migration in Ramadan. After an attack on Banu Bakr, the Prophet and his companions set out for Mecca. Abu Sufyan embraced Islam. The Prophet granted security to those who entered his house. He entered Mecca in triumph, circumambulated the Kaaba, demolished idols, performed 2 rak'ahs at the Kaaba, and pardoned Quraysh. The Battle of Hunain took place in the 8th year after migration on the 10th of Shawwal. Chiefs of Hawazin and Thaqif initiated combat after the conquest of Mecca. The Prophet and his companions marched to the Hunain Valley. Victory shifted to the Muslims after initial setbacks. The expedition of Tabuk occurred in the 9th year after migration in Rajab. It was prompted by the Romans' desire to eliminate the Islamic State. The Muslims camped in Tabuk for about 20 nights before returning without battle. Correspondence with kings and princes. The Prophet sent several companions as envoys to invite kings and princes to worship Allah alone. Among these envoys were Amr ibn Umayyah al-Damri to the Negus of Abyssinia, Hatib ibn Abi Balta'a to Muqawqis, the king of Egypt, Abdullah ibn Hudhafa al-Sahmi to Khosrow, the king of Persia, Dihya ibn Khalifa al-Kalbi to Qaisar, the king of the Romans, Al-Ala ibn al-Hadrami to Al-Mundhir ibn Sawi, the king of Bahrain, Salit ibn Amr al-Ammari to Hawda ibn Ali, the chief of Yamama, Shuja ibn Wab of Banu Asad to Harith ibn Abi Shamir al-Ghassani, the chief of Damascus, Amr ibn al-As to the king of Oman, Jifar and his brother. Delegations and additional missions. More than 70 delegations from various tribes came to the Prophet after the conquest of Mecca to announce their conversion to Islam. Examples include the delegation of Abd al-Qais, which came twice, first in the 5th year after migration, and again in the year of delegations. The delegation of Daws, which arrived at the beginning of the 7th year after migration while the Prophet was at Khaybar. Delegations led by Farwa ibn Amr al-Jadami and Sada in the 8th year after migration. The delegation of Udra in Safar in the 9th year after migration. The delegation of Thaqif in Ramadan in the 9th year after migration. The Prophet also sent Khalid ibn al-Walid to Banu al-Harith ibn Ka'b in Najran for a 3-day call to Islam. Some members embraced Islam, and Khalid began teaching them its tenets. The messenger sent Abu Musa and Mu'adh ibn Jabal to Yemen before the Farewell Hajj. The Farewell Hajj. The Prophet expressed his desire to perform Hajj and his intention to do so. He left Medina under the charge of Abu Dujana, set out for the ancient house, and delivered his farewell sermon. The sermon warned against usury and emphasized the need to adhere to the Quran and the authentic Sunnah. The Prophetic Household. The Prophet was a model in conduct and dealings with his wives, children, and companions. His life established values and principles in the hearts of believers. Allah ordained the union of male and female, basing their relationship on love, mercy, and tranquility, as stated in the Quran. And among his signs is that he created for you mates from among yourselves, that you may find tranquility in them, and he has put love and mercy between you. The Prophet practiced this teaching and advised his companions to honor women and safeguard their rights. He consoled his wives, eased their sorrows, valued their feelings, assisted them in household work, shared meals from one vessel, and spent time with them to strengthen bonds. He married 11 women. Khadija bint Khuwailid, his first wife. All his children and daughters were born to her, except his son Ibrahim, who was born to Maria al-Qibtiyah. Al-Qasim was his first child, followed by Zainab, Kulthum, Fatima, and Abdullah. Sauda bint Zama, his second wife, who was given to Aisha out of love for the Prophet. Aisha bint Abu Bakr, the dearest wife after Khadija, known for her knowledge of Islamic law. Hafsa bint Umar ibn al-Khattab, married in the 3rd year after migration. She preserved the Mushaf. Zainab bint Khuzaimah, known for feeding the needy. Salama Hind bint Abi Umayyah, married after the death of her previous husband. The Prophet prayed for her. Zainab bint Jahsh, married by the command of Allah. She was the first wife to pass away after the Prophet's death. Juwayriyah bint al-Harith, married after being captured in battle. The Prophet renamed her Juwayriyah. Safiya bint Huyay ibn Akhtab, married with a dowry that freed her after the Battle of Khaybar. Habiba Ramla bint Abi Sufyan, closely related to the Prophet through lineage. Maimuna bint al-Harith, the last wife of the Prophet. The personal attributes of the Prophet. His physical characteristics combined several traits. He was of medium height, neither tall nor short. He had a robust voice. His complexion was fair with a tinge of redness. He had dense eyebrows and dark eyes. His moral qualities were evident in his actions and words. He was truthful in deeds, words, and intentions, earning the titles Al-Sadiq and Al-Amin. He forgave and pardoned those who wronged him. One account recounts that he forgave a man who had taken up his sword while he slept. He was generous and giving. Abdullah ibn Abbas narrated that he was the most generous during Ramadan, when Jibril visited him nightly, reciting the Quran. He was humble, never elevating himself above his companions. He guarded his tongue and avoided harsh speech. Anas ibn Malik reported that he never used obscene language or curses. He respected the elderly and showed kindness to children. The death of the Prophet. The Prophet passed away on Monday, the 12th of Rabi al-Awwal, in the 11th year after migration. His illness worsened over time. He asked his wives to care for him in the house of the mother of the believers, Aisha. In his illness, he would recite supplications and ruqyah, and Aisha did so for him. He spoke privately with his daughter Fatima twice. She wept the first time and laughed the second, explaining that he told her his soul would soon depart and that she would be the first to join him from his family. On the day of his death, the curtain of his chamber was drawn aside. The Muslims lined up for prayer. Abu Bakr thought he wished to join them in prayer, but the Prophet signaled him to complete the prayer before relaxing the curtain. Reports differ on his age at death, with some saying 63, others 65, or 60. He was buried at the place of his death in a grave dug under the bed on which he passed away in Medina. May this detailed account of the life and legacy of the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, remind you of the guidance he brought. Reflect on his teachings and strive to embody his values in your daily life. Thank you for watching. May peace and blessings be upon you.